fine. We're still starting right on time now.
Oh.
Andrew, good to have you back.
Okay.
Maybe it's a good idea to introduce our two speakers and what the session is about.
Well, I'd like to introduce the session a little bit because we wanted to get a session with two of very interesting people who are working kind of at the sharp end of backend technology and who've worked as game developers, problem solvers, and are now entrepreneurs in the space. And getting your perspective on the multifaceted challenges that developers face and choosing technology, whether building their own or figuring out the specific components of a back-end solution for their game, is something that, it obviously speaks to where Gameye is in our development too. We solve one aspect of that, and maybe you guys like it, maybe you don't. I don't know. It was be interesting to get your perspective on it, but it's interesting to look at how you sort of view how developers are solving their problems, especially smaller developers who are definitely looking to outsource a lot of their functionality to back-end service providers. Some are still rolling on their own, and maybe that's good. But I wanted to examine some of the issues with a couple of real experts. So it's easier for me to pass it to you guys to introduce yourself or yourselves. So Alexander, please introduce yourself to the crowd.
Yeah, my name is Alexander Bergendahl. I am the CEO of Lootlocker. Lootlocker is the indie game backend. So we provide a range of features from game systems to sort of the common backend features like asset management and player management, and then live ops as well to boost your game's retention. So we're doing a lot like you've seen from PlayFab, from GameSparks, from Chili Connect, but we're really targeting the indie scene. I am a ex indie developer myself. We actually built this alongside one of our games, so we know what it's like to try to do big things with a small team, and we're trying to provide a technology that can help people to achieve that. We're a pretty young company. We raised our seed funding earlier this year, but we're already live with a product as that was built prior to raising. So it's really exciting to speak with indies, hear about their problems, and see how we can find solutions for that with our technology.
Awesome. So Drew, how can you give us a bit more of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll start in the Wayback Machine because it talks more about indie stuff. But as I was in college and graduating, I took a student project to turn into a hobbyist project, and we built an online multiplayer, sort of a hybrid between an RTS and a MOBA. It was called the Maestros. And for that game, it was at that time, we started in 2013, where a lot of these backend as a service technologies were either just coming online or kind of nascent. And so we rolled our own with all of the perils that that come along with that. I gave a GDC talk, kind of a post-mortem on that at this year. From this very living room, even.
Yes, it was a great talk too.
Yeah. And so that we learned a ton of things. That game was built in Unreal, and the backend was built in Node.js, which the YouTube comments flamed me for. But the experience was really valuable, and so two of the folks that I worked on that game with, I work with now. But after and during we were kind of working on that project, I was at Riot Games for 6 years, I'd say. I worked on their online platform, worked on the matchmaking system for League of Legends, some of their machine learning for detecting disruptive behaviors and griefing in game and hate speech and all of that stuff. Worked on the game, worked on the client, kind of all over the place. I was the tech lead of their player behavior team when I left in May of last year, so 15, 18 months coming up on something like that. And since then, I've been doing consulting and work for hire and backend services for games. My team kind of has all done the gameplay engineering side and all done the backend platform side. And so we're kind of going around and helping a lot of other shops to do that. Big shops, small shops, whatever. A lot of the team has experience with some of the scale that we had at Riot, Microsoft, Blizzard, etc. But we've also worked on indie projects, so we kind of do both.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at sort of indies as a particular segment because it is just limited resources, limited budget, maybe a lot of creativity, a lot of passion going into the project, and so so there's no margin for error sometimes when they're making technology choices. It can be a killer for a project, or at least something that presents a huge barrier if a snap judgment has been made and something hasn't worked out for them. So I'm kind of on that tack a little bit, and I'm kind of going to ask you to maybe step outside yourselves a little bit. But what are the questions that an indie developer is looking at when they're trying to evaluate a piece of technology for their game, especially on the back end, where there aren't there's a story, but there aren't as many sexy demos to look at. Maybe there's some of the technologies are still maybe not quite. It's difficult. How do they evaluate for themselves whether it's a fit? I mean, it's a broad question, but it's like, what sort of questions should they be asking? And maybe Alexander, maybe I could throw it to you first.
Sure. I think, the first step for us is actually often trying to convince the indie developer that they should include a backend in their game. A lot of indies, rightfully so, think small, but you because of the hit nature of our business, you build a small little indie darling, and then you end up with a massive game. You've got console, first parties knocking at your door, wanting you to get the game on their platform. You're looking at multiple PC stores. You're looking at cross-platform play and stuff like that. And suddenly you realize, oh, I haven't actually built this game for scale, and maybe can't take advantage of that, and that could be hugely detrimental to your business. So our goal to preface your question is first to often persuade them, or explain them why getting just even the basic backend support in their game is really important. I think that's one area that we're still
a build versus buy question for even the smaller guys to look at. Is that your major competition?
No, I think right now it's more just people not understanding the power that it can give you long term, having this, and once you can start shifting a lot of the work over to a backend, once you've done that work, it allows you, frees up your time so you can actually focus on what makes your game special. There's definitely a lot of people we've spoken to that just would rather build their own, but I think most people, once they've gotten to that point of actually I do need a backend, they have seemingly been more open to looking at what is already available, because I think they know that they're already using Unity for their game engine. They're looking at technology for multiplayer hosting, so they're already in that mindset of there are so many services out there to help us. Why build our own?
I pass it to Drew. What are you looking at when you maybe are looking at a solution for one of your clients? What are you asking? Like, what kind of questions are you asking yourself as a problem solver, and maybe also as a now that you've had that indie experience?
Yeah, I think there's kind of scales to it, where a lot of the smallest indies don't know to think about the fact that they I don't want to say need a platform, but they're like, I need stuff to persist, and they go and they just write some code and they put it in a database, right? And they're not thinking about a platform, they're thinking about a feature. And at the smallest level, you immediately, you're like, there are probably ways to do that don't involve you writing code that either as a gameplay engineer is not your forte, or most likely you just don't have time for. There's a lot of other things going on. And so at the very smallest tier, there's a lot of education that we do, where it's just like, hey, there's stuff out there. You didn't have to write that. You can go and get it, and it's pretty cheap. At the medium tier, it's of indies, so maybe there's 5 people working on a project. It's a lot of the build versus buy, because they're not in a space where they want to spend one of their 3 or 4 engineers full time handling backend stuff. And in a lot of cases, when you're dealing with a platform, if you're trying to do your own stuff, you're going to be in that space where it needs to be somebody's job. And so most of that is a buy education, where we're like, you need to find something that's going to handle the 80% yourself, or the 80% itself, and maybe there's a 20% that you'll grow into later. But for now, it's kind of that. And the reason that I think there's education in both of those areas right now is something like what you said, right? If you're choosing a game engine, it's easy as an indie to be like, Blizzard uses Unity for Hearthstone. Unity is good enough for me. Or like, even at a medium size, you're like, everybody is using Unreal 4 for X, Y, and Z game. That's good enough for me. There's not a lot of back-end technology that has those kind of like, oh, Blizzard's using it, so I'm sure it's good enough for me. Like there's still younger platforms, and some of them are good, but they just haven't got the sort of name brand recognition where everyone's like, oh yeah, I just use that one. And so there's a lot of helping navigate people through that space right now.
Yeah, I mean, what are the sort of, so in evaluating them for themselves, for developers, I guess I'm trying to get at what are the sort of test cases they should be trying to sort of set for, that this one, this does everything I need it to do. And obviously it's a broad area because you could have, tests for asset management or in-game purchase management and refunds and whether it's matchmaking testing, and that's a broad. So, but what are the kind of test cases, and how does even an indie developer or developer at medium size really sort of go kind of sit down and really work out what are the kind of scale tests that they need? Because I'm used from looking at from the outside for some of these, they all claim that they're scalable, and that doesn't necessarily pan out in reality. So Drew, what would you sort of advise a developer to do, to think how to sort of structure those sort of hard test cases?
I wish I had a great answer for you here. I mean, the ones that are truly black boxes are really hard, and right now, that's a lot of what we do is we kind of pass along the word of mouth of this is what other studios have encountered, and to really set up a test yourself, like to load test a platform or whatever. First off, it requires you to coordinate with the platform. Like nobody likes for you to just have like 100,000 people show up on their platform that are fake users or whatever without telling them. Even Amazon, like when I work with large companies, we give them a call first before we like send 1 million people at them, fake robot users. But it requires that, and that takes time that an indie probably doesn't have. There's a lot to look at with like the types of technologies and how they scale. The traditional like lobby systems and matchmaking systems and all that stuff, you kind of have to get in there and load test them. There's different properties with a game provisioner or a game allocator where it's like, okay, how many game servers can you give us per minute? Maybe you can load test that with like half the time or effort, because really you're just it's like a little through rate, like how many game servers can I allocate in a minute, is like maybe more of a concern, because other than that it's just straight capacity, whatever your upper limit is, and you can call them and ask them like, when will I run out of servers?
Yeah, Alexander, I mean, obviously you're in the mix, and you've got a product, and you're trying to talk to developers and say, yeah, come test our stuff and test it for yourself. I mean, what are you sort of pointing them at? How can you kind of validate it or help them, validate it for their use case?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our challenges right now, because a lot of people, since we're relatively new on the scene, we don't have a lot of games running live with it that are notable. Having one sort of tentpole game would be really valuable to say, look, this game runs fine. If you want a reference to talk to them, we'll set you up with that, and that would be really helpful. I think the best thing that I can do from the sales side and not being technical is to make sure that we feel like we're aligned with their goals, and that they feel like we understand what they're trying to achieve, and that that they have full access to us. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. Our entire business is run through Discord, so they can just kind of come into our chat and just talk to us as if we're in the same room as them. and really provide them with access to our developers, so they feel like if they have a question or concern, they can talk to us about it. We're built on that, on AWS, and are confident in our scaling, but obviously that only can really be tested to be proven.
To kind of jump off from that, actually, one of the things that I can't stress enough with indie developers who in some cases are hyper aware of it, in some cases are very ambitious about it, is that like the time you spend on this, like what we're maximizing for or optimizing for is you spending the least time possible on the back end, because I don't want to say it's completely non-differentiating, because in some cases it truly is, but that's the 20 side of the 80-20, right? Like a lot of it is non-differentiating for you as a game developer, right? Like it has to work. It's killer features that it works, and so finding the services that require the least amount of time from them is really important. It needs to really naturally fit into the games that they're building, and it needs to be really low effort for them to integrate with, because as a team that like rolled their own everything at Riot and stuff, it can be an all-encompassing, like overwhelming thing to run a platform. There's a lot of live operation stuff that if you haven't done it before, you really can't you cannot understate how large of an effort it is to keep everything keep the lights on with everything. So indie developers don't have time for that, and that's why these services exist.
Exactly, and that's what we try to market ourselves as. We want you to focus on what makes your game special, because that's what you as an indie developer is doing, is creating something unique. You're building that on top of technology that already exists, on top of the engine, and on top of all these different assets that you can get in game or behind the scenes. So why come up with something new for your backend when you could use something that already exists, as long as obviously it fits what you need to do.
Okay, so looking at backend services and looking at maybe not the 95% case or even the 99% case, but you end up with the next Fall Guys. You end up with the next, or you scrap it out and you've got the next Among Us. So obviously Gameye's in that mix with our scaling on backend, but from the other perspectives or something else that's maybe non-obvious for game developers that they need to sort of plan for, how do they mitigate success so that they don't, lose all their players because something's fallen over, and keep them happy? Just anything that's sort of like from your own experience, it's just not obvious that is from the outside. Alexander or Drew, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, from my personal experience, my previous company, or my first company, we made a free-to-play skiing and snowboarding game called Snow for PC and PlayStation 4. And, it was no Fall Guys or Among Us or Fortnite, but, we had nearly 200,000 monthly active users at one point, and, really passionate group of players that, love the sport, and that, this is before Steep came out, and we had, a really good niche for ourselves. And not having a backend when you start getting a lot more users, other than it wouldn't have worked with our game, but we having the freedom to be able to, if we make a mistake, or you release an update, something doesn't work, you got a really angry player base, having the ability to just be like, all right, let's just give them something to make them happy, give them a pair of skis that don't exist elsewhere in the game, and just get that out to the players and be able to make a decision in the morning. And for myself, being the least technical person on the team, being able to go into the backend interface and do that, and give every user an asset, a pair of skis or something, that solves a lot of problems right there. And that's, again, what we built our technology around, is being able to do these things really easily, even for non-technical people.
So if I could reflect back a bit, something will go wrong, and having the facility to then placate your player base easily, maybe by the producer or somebody who's not technical, that would be a big help.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I used to work at a company called GameForge, which was an online game publisher, and things would invariably go wrong. Mm-hmm. And then there would be this this facility for the product owners to put some virtual currency maybe back into the system to as a compensation. So it's interesting that you've kind of seen something similar. Drew, what do you think? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna reinforce what you said. The gamers love to receive stuff, so they usually are forgiving. They're very vocal and angry at first, but once you first give them transparency and say, hey, we're here, we are listening, we are responding, and then say like, we understand there's a problem, here's something that we've done immediately to fix this, and something that a reward or something that you can get, that usually buys you some time.
Yeah, I love that you talked about that, because we talk a lot about the necessities of backend, but some of the studios that I work with that haven't done games as a service, they don't always understand the wins and all the things you can do that are just magical in a lot of ways with a live game and a live service and a backend that supports it. Changing content live, running events, all that stuff. As players, you might take it for granted now, but as a technical team, I mean, if you've been shipping games on discs for 20 years, this is some really cool stuff you can do. And if you build for it, it's really exciting. It allows you to really evolve and change your game in really exciting ways. And it allows you to mitigate risk in a lot of really interesting and exciting ways. Just having toggles to disable, maps or characters or whatever, because like you said, something's going to go wrong. That's how it works. That's how game development happens. But making that a graceful degradation, graceful failure, is something that you can only really do with a platform, because you really need a way to reach out and modify the game that people are interacting with. And you got to have a backend for that. So that's the first feature I always add when I get in, because it makes all the gameplay engineers really happy.
Yeah, and then going off what you said, in addition to giving things, often you can give things, not every player is paying attention and stuff like that. You might not have the ability to tell the player what they are receiving in a little notification, but having also the ability to connect to your players. One of the biggest problems we see with the industry is how you often, as a developer, you build your game, you then give it to the first party, or you give it to Steam, and they actually are the ones that are distributing it, and they own your players basically. There's a big wall between you and them. So having the ability to notify your players in the game, saying, hey, here's an alert that tells you why things are broken, or what's changed, or why we've had to revert something, or why you've received something, or that there is something in your inventory because of something, is really valuable, because most players aren't checking the forums or going to Discord. They react very quickly when something's different in the game and not to what they expect, and you get them tweeting at you or something like that. So it's much easier just to nip it in the bud by having a setup for notifying them already.
Yeah,
and having the right backend will help you do that. Sorry, go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, just the front page of your game is this in a lot of cases untapped real estate, where there's so much you can tell players, and companies who have started to realize that it's the opposite problem. It is overly tapped real estate, where there's things coming at you all over the place, but it's such a valuable piece of real estate for you to tell players about changes in your game, to tell them about what's going wrong, what's going right, things that they should look at. That's something that that's content you can only deliver online.
Can I just, Jürgen, I'm just going to take the question from the chat. Question for Alexander. Is your goal to offer everything a game needs at all times with enough flexibility to support edge cases? Or is the goal more to offer all the basic features and to let the developers build their own services around that?
That's a great question, Gilles. We're sort of doing both in some ways. We're trying to provide the most common features in as straightforward system as possible, both from the traditional backend and live ops, but also looking at what type of game systems can we move onto the backend, because a lot of games have the same. You got a leveling system, or you're dealing with challenges and different things like that. We then also provide the admin API, so you can go straight in without having to go through our console and use the tools as you wish. We've have built ourselves in a slightly different way, where everything's sort of built on top of assets. So everything is kind of an asset in our backend. So then with the admin API, you can go ahead and use them as you wish, and it's a lot more flexible that way if you're inclined. And then we're also working on Cloud Code, which allows you to run your own scripts on your own server, and that talks directly to our backend.
All right. So you've answered Jill's questions. That's great. Thank you very much, Alexander. I kind of wanted to know about can backends be enable are you seeing enabling of things like crossplay, and some of the fights that are happening right now, whether it's Epic Game Store versus Steam or just the normal console versus PC crossplay. Is there things to keep in mind with crossplay that to stop developers painting themselves into a corner or running down dead ends? Just sort of general in the last few minutes, Drew, what have you seen?
Yeah, crossplay it feels old hand, but it's very developers will know it's kind of a very new space in a lot of ways. So one of the things that I think you have to take into account is the one I see the most, people painting themselves in a corner, is they get into bed with Steam or whoever, and then all of a sudden crossplay is incredibly difficult, because if you don't have your own backend where you can keep track of your users yourself and have their own account tied to that, then everything is tied to Steam. And like you said, Steam owns your player base. And so that's the easiest way to paint yourself in a corner with crossplay, is to go all in on a platform and use only their things. There's varying levels, like shades of gray there, where Epic has a pretty good mechanism to help you get to a crossplay situation. But even there, crossplay is kind of different grades of, like, your friends list is, half of these people are on PS4 and you can only show them in certain way. Like, this is actually a legal space that's being navigated right now by Epic, because they didn't do this for a very long time. And so everyone wants to own these users and these friend graphs and all these things. And if you're just buying into a platform without having one of your own, not that you have to build it yourself, but if you use one of these backends as a service where your users are and their data are associated with you and your game in a way, that gives you the flexibility to do crossplay, and then when you do a crossplay, to make use of that data and deliver better experiences for them.
Alexander.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the whole owning the player thing is really important. I think our goal is to really empower the developer to own their players, and I don't like using the word own, because I don't think gamers want to be considered people's developers' property, but it's really, I think, unfair how much of a wall there is around these developers and when they have a successful game on a platform. So we don't do obviously the multiplayer side of things, but we obviously have the player information on our backend, and we've had some cases where you've got a game on multiple platforms where you need to obviously talk with a platform first party to make sure that players can merge their accounts and can share information, because especially if you're dealing with microtransactions, platforms get a little sticky when it comes to where are they making the money, and or where is the microtransaction happening. But in general, it's as you said, it's actually quite new that platforms are letting people do this. So it's a lot of uncharted territory, and I'm sure there can be a lot of big issues coming up as more games achieve it, thanks to good technology.
So you Alexander, you have another question from Gilles. Is there a reason for the simple, straightforward, scalable pricing system mentioned on the site that it isn't public?
Yeah, they're very simple. We, as a young company, we really want to work closely with developers. So we're trying to, we paint the picture of what our goal is to be simple, straightforward, and scalable. And we'd love to talk to you and understand what pricing works for you, and how you want to work, because it definitely is the other backends price in their own ways, and we've heard a lot of people aren't happy with that. So we're trying to find the most flexible pricing for everyone.
I sympathize. when you're a newer entrant into into trying to compete with existing larger companies.
Yeah, exactly. But Gilles, join our Discord and reach out to me or Andreas, my CTO. We are there to chat and can talk to you about our, what options there are and what we can do for you.
Any sort of last comments, guys? I mean, we're now at that time. It's the wrapping up time. I mean, I had a lot more questions, but half an hour goes in a flash. What would you want to be as your sort of 30-second sign off for developers looking at backend services? Pick a topic, any topic. Drew, how about you?
Yeah, I would just say talk to some people about it before you jump in head first, because this is a big space and there are people with experience. So get some expert opinions and advice, and then you'll make better decisions from the start.
Yeah, definitely talk to people that that have done it, and reach out to the people that make the technology, and then people that have the skills to help you with the technology. But definitely, if you're an indie developer working on a game, definitely think about backend, because it is really important to think about early on. And if you do the work early, you don't need to work. You don't have to do a lot more once you've got it up and running, and then you can take advantage of it later. And the more often you do it, the easier it is to do, and then it'll just become second nature when you build your games.
Right. I mean, that the story of being able to, wrap in community management with the back-end services, and keep your player base happy. I think that's super important. Guys, I just want to thank you for your time. I thought those insights were fantastic. We were delighted that you made the time for us for our little free online event today. Thank you so much. It's been very much appreciated. And I know that everybody probably in the audience appreciated it too. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Very interesting stuff. For now, we're going to finish the industry insights too. I'm glad everything went well today. We had speakers, some great guests, and some great insights, I think. I'm going to upload everything to YouTube later this week or beginning of next week, and I'm going to announce this on the Gameye LinkedIn, which is a convenient way to follow what we're up to. I want to thank everybody, especially Andrew and Sebastian, for hosting the sessions, doing the introductions, and being such proactive sparring partners for the speakers. And I want to wish everybody a good evening, and we call it a day.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye.